What happens when your favourite wholesome Pixar movies are reimagined as terrifying horror posters? I've taken 3 of Pixar's most beloved films and twisted them into something much darker. Starting with one I'm sure you will all recognise, Monsters Inc. A fun, colourful adventure full of friendly monsters and magical doors. But what if the monsters weren't quite as friendly as you remember? Let's start by grabbing this image of Sully here and placing it on our canvas. I'm then going to make a selection on either side and extend the image with some generative fill. However, I think Sully gets a little too much spotlight in the franchise, so let's just go ahead and bin him off. Perfect. Now, before we carry on, let's quickly clean up this lovely mess that the generative fill has left us.
2 hours later.
Alright, it's all looking good. However, I don't know about you, but I like my doors to actually have handles. So let's just grab this little doorknob here and pop it on. Let's add a slight drop shadow for some realism, followed by a cheeky little bit of inner shadow too. And with our basic template complete, the real fun can now begin. Starting with the true star of the show.
Yeah, sure, step aside, kid, we're not.
Let's grab this 3D render of Mr. Wazowski and place him behind our door. I like the idea of him emerging from some horror scene, almost like he's breaking out of some creepy, monstrous prison. Which, of course, means we've got to make our little Mikey boy look 10 times scarier. I'm starting with a red hue and saturation mask over his eye to give him that more sinister look. But he's still not looking scary, so let's go ahead and fix that with a frown. And I'm not entirely sure how logistically this would work, given the whole one-eye situation, but to my surprise, it actually sells to look pretty well. I'm then going to paint around his eye with a low exposure mask to create a more sort of sunken look. I did, however, notice that the frown was lacking some texture. So grabbing a patch of skin from his body, let's just overlay it above and blend it in. Finally, let's add one more layer of shadows just to enhance that dark, sunken look a little bit more. Onto the teeth. First of all, let's remove this non-threatening braces-like bar, and instead, I'll bring in this dripping image of blood. Give it a quick puppet warp to match the angle of the mouth, and then switch to the right blending mode to get that realistic look. And of course, a quick cleanup to tidy it all up. However, I don't think that's enough, so let's get a little bit messier with the splatter, which we'll place just above for that proper monstrous look. And finally, one last area of detail on his face, these low exposure crease-like shadows, which I think added so much more depth. And the final touch is just this inner shadow over his body, which as you can see, just blends him into the scene so much more nicely. For the creepy background, I'm bringing down the exposure to create a darker atmosphere, and I'm also gently dabbing in some darker areas around his feet to ground him nicely into the scene. I'm then going to throw in this image of some smoke and give it a green overlay to match Mike's skin color. And I don't know why it would be green, but it just looks kind of cool. We've got to create an illusion that the room is being lit by the glowing smoke. So using a low exposure mask, I'll erase the space inside the door and any areas spilling onto the walls, which of course would also be green. This part of the design process was really dependent on just nailing that lighting, which basically means just layering a whole bunch of different exposure layers and also bringing in some of that brighter smoke on top. Now in the film, this room obviously belongs to Boo. So let's bring her into our image, but we're going to turn her into a solid black silhouette with a slight Gaussian blur. This gives us a shadow-like effect which we can then cast onto the wall and onto the floor. Then we'll just lower the opacity to make it look a little bit more realistic. This empty space in front of the door just felt like the perfect opportunity to drop a little teddy bear, which would add a little bit more story to the design. Time to bring in our Monsters Inc. movie title, but we're switching it to solid black with a bright green outer glow. And what better slogan for the poster other than the classic,
I'm watching you, Wazowski. Always watching.
and I think this horror style font gives that phrase a whole new meaning. We're nearly there with the poster, however let's just bring in a few more shadows around the top and the sides. And bring in a little bit more light just glowing onto the walls as we're really trying to push that sort of eerie glowing effect. Now this is a part of the design where I want your guys' opinions. Obviously it makes more sense for the floor here to be glowing green as if it's coming from the room. However, this purple lighting I just thought looked really cool. It's just something about that green and purple contrast which I just absolutely love. So although it doesn't make too much sense, did I make the right choice by going for a more stylistic approach, or should I have just gone for the green? Let me know in the comments. And with the poster complete, all that was left to do was just add a few final effects in the camera raw filter. And I present to you a horror poster design of Monsters Inc. I'm honestly really happy with how the colours came out. I feel like it just nailed that sort of Goosebumps magazine type vibe, which I've always really admired. Now that poster design was good, however this next one definitely gets a little bit crazy. And if you're vibing to the music, well that's all thanks to today's sponsor, Epidemic Sound, which is genuinely the best soundtracking platform for every creative. Every single track and sound effect in this video comes straight from their insane library of 50,000 premium soundtracks made by real artists and 200,000 plus sound effects. And the best part is they're all compatible completely restriction-free, which means copyright claims are just one less thing I have to worry about. I can put my videos out worldwide and stay locked in on just making them as good as possible. If you guys are familiar with my content, you'll know that I love a good comical, quirky backing track, which Epidemic Sound makes so easy to find. Let's just simply search something like funny jazz, and straight away we have the perfect song. However, if this track wasn't quite what I was looking for, there's no need to worry, as we can just simply find other tracks which sound similar. And of course, it's not just music, as my videos are full of sound effects and transitions, such as this one. Or when I'm trying to build some tension, I like to use a big impact sort of sound effect just like this. Thanks to their huge sound effects library, I can instantly find exactly what I need to make these edits feel clean and professional, which really upgrades the quality of these videos. So for any creatives who are looking to bring some life and stress-free tracks and sound effects into their videos, I genuinely couldn't recommend Epidemic Sound enough. Simply head over to the link in my description to start upgrading the quality of your videos with Hollywood-grade music and sound effects from Epidemic Sound. Thanks again, Epidemic Sound, for sponsoring the video. Next up is one of Pixar's most beloved modern franchises, Inside Out, a wholesome story exploring our emotions. But what if we took the Inside Out movie title a little too literally? Let's start with our image of joy and remove the background. I'll quickly patch up these missing areas with a bit of generative fill. Much better. Now let's go ahead and make Joy look rather evil. I'm going to make a selection over her eye so we can create our own evil frowning eyelids. And of course we'll blend the edges in with a soft coloured brush to match the surrounding skin tone. With that one done, let's repeat the same process onto the other eye. Now they look a little strange without any eyebrows, so using the pen tool I'm going to create this black swirl just above. Let's resize it and get it into place. Although I did then notice that we left the old eyebrow still on her face. So let's get rid of that. A quick mirror onto the other side, and then we'll use a soft eraser to fade the eyebrow behind her hair. Using a low exposure mask, I'm going to paint in some shadows just beneath her eyebrows for a more 3D look. Now, what better way to make some innocent characters look rather sinister than give them some red evil eyes with a cheeky colour overlay. When designing these horror posters, I like to introduce as many shadows as possible for a more sort of 3D realistic look. For our background, I'm going to use this image of a mirror scene and extend it using generative fill. With our background in place, let's lower the exposure so we can work on the lighting. I'm erasing all the areas that should act as light sources, like the window, as well as any areas where the light would naturally reflect, such as the radiator, mirror, and ceiling. I'm then going to bring in the smoke PNG and change the color overlay to blue, followed by a blending style, which in this case is the color option. This just adds a really nice subtle blue tint over everything. However, we're not quite getting the look I'm aiming for just yet, so let's grab this image of a moonlight beam and place it over our background. Using the blending modes, I'll switch it to overlay, which has nailed that more mysterious and dusky looking effect I was going for. With the hue and saturation effect set to color burn, I'm going to gently paint over our character to give her a warmer, more intense color style, which I think makes the poster look that bit more cinematic. I didn't quite like the effect on her eyes, however, so let's just erase those. Now, every psycho horror villain usually has their weapon of choice, so it's only right that we give little Joy here one too. I'm going to place it just above her hand, and then using a pen tool selection, I'll raise where her fingers are. And of course the same for her thumb, which I'll actually paint back in to make the effect more believable. And using a perspective warp, I'll also just increase the size of our weapon so it takes more focus in the design. We're then going to lower the exposure over everything so we can start adding highlights from the light source. And the floor is looking a little too clean for my liking, so let's bring in this red puddle and set the blend mode to vivid light. I'll then slightly lower the opacity so some of the floor texture can peek through. I also decided that her hair was too bright, so using a darker blue, I just painted over it all.
Because tonight will be the...
I'm then going to add another exposure mask, but this time I'm creating some darker shadows on the right side of her body, the side facing away from the window. I thought Joy could do with some more dripping blood from her hand, so we'll drop this in as well. We'll add a few splashes across her arms and her face, along with some scratches to show a bit of wear and tear after whatever crazy rampage she's just been on. Now let's bring in our Inside Out logo, and I'm going to paint over it using this red overlay to match the horror vibe. Then a few inner shadows and a drop shadow should blend it nicely into the scene. And honestly, the movie title already hints at a horror concept, so why not just add the word literally after it? One final detail, I grabbed this rib-shaped silhouette and placed it over her dress. Using a clipping mask, I'll paint in some shadows around the edges to create that sort of raised 3D effect. Then we'll bring in this fabric texture and set the blend mode to darken, just to let some of those black lines peek through. And so with our poster design complete, it was just time to add a few finishing effects in the camera raw filter. So here it is, our horror poster redesign of Inside Out. I honestly didn't think making Joy look this sinister was possible, but I think we pulled it off. Let me know how you guys think I did in the comments, and if you've made it this far in the video, then go ahead and comment the word chicken. And finally, for our last poster design, we're taking on one of Pixar's most disappointing movies. Lightyear. We all know the Space Ranger for his wild intergalactic adventures, but what if this movie was his last one? Let's of course begin with this poster of Buzz, and I'm going to make a selection around his face using the pen tool. Then let's grab this cracked, burnt texture and place it over the top, and click it into position. I'm then hopping onto Envato Elements so I can grab a high-res skull image. And this one works perfectly. I'll bin off the background and line it up where the skull would naturally sit inside his head. The idea for this poster is to show Buzz Lightyear floating through space after being exposed to radiation in the atmosphere, which is why his skin is slowly cracking away, revealing the skull underneath, which these shadows behind should help sell that effect. I'm also going to remove the nose off Mr. Lightyear and paint over it using the same colours as his space helmet. The skin ripping away looked a little too flimsy for my liking, so I painted in this fleshy layer behind the face to add that extra level of realism and detail. Finished of course with some inner shadows and highlights. Now all this text on the poster was annoying me, so I made a selection and with some generative fill was able to just continue the torso of Buzz himself. Now of course we have to show how the radiation actually got into his suit, so let's add these cracks on his helmet. I'll erase the areas which are fading into the distance and then set the blend mode to screen, which will make him stand out a little bit more. I wanted to show how he might have been hit by like multiple pieces of meteorite hurling towards him, so more than a few cracks were definitely needed. To give the fabric a burnt look, I lowered the saturation of the purple headwear so it becomes more of a charcoal colour. Now let's make the surrounding space a little scarier. I'll paint over all the blue with this red overlay, and then carry it slightly onto his suit for a bit of reflection. Then let's switch to blend mode to multiply and overlay this red and black texture across the whole thing for that eerie dark space vibe. Using one final exposure mask, I'm creating this shine to show the red light reflecting off the glass of his helmet. Now it's time to bring in our logo, and we're going to add these blood splatters on top to make it very clear that this poster is of course horror themed. Then let's finish it off with a nice red tint over the text. And finally, following Buzz Lightyear's famous catchphrase,
"To infinity and beyond!"
it only made sense that the beyond was his ultimate demise. And just like before, let's polish it all up in the camera raw filter. And so my friends, I present to you our horror sci-fi poster of Mr. Lightyear. Although the design itself was quite subtle and minimal, I have to say I really like how this one came out. Let me know in the comments which one of these poster designs was your favourite, and of course any suggestions for the next episode. If you enjoyed today's video, then why not check out one of these two. And again, a huge thank you to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring today's video.